Dawn came bitter on January 12th, 1889. The ice fog hung thick as wet wool over Thornwood Ranch, turning the world into a gray nothing that swallowed sound. Caleb stood at the water trough, his breath crystallizing on his beard, and raised the iron bar to break the night's freeze. The cattle were bawling from the barn, hungry and thirsty, same as every winter morning for the past 8 years. The pump handle burned cold through his gloves. He worked it twice, filled the kettle for coffee, and turned back toward the house. That's when he saw them. A small figure collapsed at the ranch gate. 2 fence poles lashed together with rope, burlap stretched between, and in the makeshift travois, 2 wooden apple crates. Caleb ran. The boy's lips were blue, his fingers frozen to the rope, 9 years old maybe. His eyes opened as Caleb knelt. "They killed Mama for the land," the child whispered. Then he fainted. Caleb carried all 3 into the house. The boy weighed nothing. The twins, a girl and a boy he guessed, barely more than babies, were strapped into the crates with strips of torn blanket. Their skin had that terrible gray-blue pallor he'd seen on cattle left out too long. He laid them on the bearskin rug in front of the fireplace. The fire had burned low overnight. He threw on 2 logs, opened the flue wide, and blew on the coals until flames caught and roared. The sound filled the cabin, crackling, hungry, alive. He stripped the wet clothes off the twins first. Their little onesies were frozen stiff, crusted with ice. He worked fast, wrapping each baby in wool blankets from his own bed, rubbing their chests and backs in small circles the way his wife had shown him years ago. The smell of wet wool and wood smoke filled the room. His hands remembered the motion, small bodies, fragile ribs under his palms, the weight. The girl whimpered, a soft, pitiful sound. Caleb's hands started to tremble. He lifted the boy twin closer to the fire, and for one terrible moment, he wasn't holding a stranger's child. He was holding Sarah. His Sarah, 18 months old. The same weight, the same size. He cut the memory off, forced his hand steady, boiled milk on the stove and tested it on his wrist. Not too hot. He dipped a clean cloth in the warm milk and let the babies suck on it. Slow, patient. Their little mouths worked weakly, but they worked. The older boy, the one who'd dragged them here, was still unconscious on the rug. Caleb turned to him next. "Son," he said quietly, kneeling, "let's get you warm." He reached for the boy's boots. Old leather, cracked and too small. The left one looked thicker than the right, the heel bulging slightly. The boy's eyes snapped open. "No, sir." His voice was a rasp. "Can't take 'em off." "Your feet are frostbit," Caleb said. You'll lose your toes." "No, sir." The boy clutched his boots to his chest, panic flooding his young face. "Please." Caleb studied him. Thin, hollow-cheeked, old eyes in a child's face, the kind of fear that came from more than cold. "All right," Caleb said. He pulled another blanket around the boy's shoulders instead. "We'll wait." He made coffee, strong and black. The smell of it, bitter, familiar, grounded him. He poured a cup, laced it with sugar and a splash of whiskey, and helped the boy sit up enough to sip. "What's your name?" "Emmett, sir. Emmett Hayes." "Where are your folks, Emmett?" The boy's face went still. "Dead, sir. 2 months back. Wagon accident." "I'm sorry." Emmett didn't answer. He stared into the fire, his small hands wrapped around the tin cup. Caleb asked the question he didn't want to ask. "What did you mean about your mama?" Emmett's jaw tightened. He looked like he might cry, but instead he just whispered, "She said run. Said get to Thornwood Ranch. Said you were the only one left who'd help." Before Caleb could ask more, he heard it. The sound of wagon wheels crunching over frozen snow. Hoofbeats, 2 horses, maybe 3. He moved to the window. Sheriff Tom Burdock's wagon was rolling up the long drive, a plume of white breath trailing from the horse's nostrils. And in the passenger seat, wrapped in an expensive black coat, sat Douglas Merrick. Caleb's stomach went cold. Emmett saw them too. He scrambled back against the wall, his breath coming fast. "That's him," the boy hissed. "That's the man." "Stay here," Caleb said. "Don't say a word unless I tell you to." He stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door halfway shut behind him. The cold bit at his face. The wind carried the smell of horse sweat and leather. Sheriff Burdock climbed down first, his face apologetic. He was a decent man as far as sheriffs went, but he was careful. Too careful. Douglas Merrick followed, his boots polished, his face smooth and clean-shaven. He looked like a man who'd never broken a sweat in his life. "Morning, Caleb," the sheriff said. "Tom?" Merrick stepped forward, glancing at the house. "We heard you found some children." "I did." "Orphans," Merrick said. His voice was smooth, educated. "The Hayes children, if I'm not mistaken." Caleb didn't answer. Merrick pulled a folded document from inside his coat. I'm the executor of the Hayes estate, legal guardian of the children, as appointed by Judge Holloway. He held the paper out. I've come to collect them. Caleb took the document, read it slowly. It looked official. Judge Holloway's signature at the bottom, the seal of the territorial court. They just got here, Caleb said. They're half frozen. They need rest. Of course, Merrick said, his tone all sympathy. I'll take them to the boarding house in town. Mrs. Fletcher will care for them until arrangements can be made. The sheriff cleared his throat. There's also the matter of the Hayes Ranch, Caleb. He pulled another document from his coat. This one was a foreclosure notice. Caleb scanned it. Hayes Family Ranch, 640 acres, outstanding debt $12,000. Foreclosure auction, April 28, 1889, 90 days. Merrick smiled, thin, cold. Tragic, really. John and Mary Hayes were good people, but debt is debt. The bank has no choice. Caleb folded the papers, handed them back. You ain't taking those children, he said quietly. Merrick's smile didn't waver. I'm afraid the law says otherwise. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Caleb, they stay with me till they're well, Caleb said. His voice was iron. After that, we'll see. Merrick's eyes went flat. We'll see indeed, Mr. Thornwood. He turned and climbed back into the wagon. The sheriff followed, casting one last uncertain look at Caleb. The wagon rolled away, wheels crunching, until the sound faded into the frozen morning. Caleb stood on the porch for a long time, watching the empty road. Inside, Emmett was still pressed against the wall, his face white as snow. Is he gone? The boy whispered. For now. He'll come back. Caleb looked at him, at the twins sleeping by the fire, at the two small boots the boy refused to remove. Yeah, Caleb said. He will. By noon, half the county knew. That's how small towns worked. A man couldn't sneeze without someone offering a handkerchief and 3 opinions on his health. Caleb needed supplies, milk for the babies, oats, bandages. He hitched the wagon, wrapped the children in every blanket he owned, and drove into Flat Rock Township. The general store smelled of tobacco and pickled goods. The potbelly stove in the corner radiated heat, and a cluster of men stood around it, hands extended, talking low. The conversation died when Caleb walked in. Mrs. Crenshaw was at the counter, her bony frame draped in black wool. She had the kind of face that looked like it had been weaned on vinegar. Her eyes slid to the children, then back to Caleb. Well, she said loudly, isn't that something? Caleb ignored her. He set his list on the counter. Morning, Howard. Howard Dutch, the storekeeper, looked uncomfortable. He was a soft man with soft hands and a talent for avoiding conflict. Morning, Caleb. Heard you had some visitors? I did. 3 of them. Mrs. Crenshaw's voice cut through the store like a saw blade. Orphans, I'm told. Mighty convenient. A rich man living alone suddenly collecting children. One of the railroad men near the stove snickered. Caleb turned slowly. You got something to say, ma'am? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She sniffed. No normal man lives alone for 8 years, and now suddenly 3 little ones show up? A body has to wonder about your intentions. The word hung in the air. Intentions. Caleb's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes on him. The ranchers looked uncomfortable. The railroad workers looked smug. A hand touched his arm. Pearl Whitmore stood beside him, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face weathered but kind. She was the telegraph operator, a widow herself, and one of the few people in town Caleb trusted. Don't listen to crows, Caleb, she said quietly. They only know one song. Mrs. Crenshaw's face went red. Well, I never... No, Pearl said. You never do. That's the problem. She picked up Caleb's list, started pulling items from the shelves herself. Canned milk, rolled oats, gauze, and iodine. She worked with the efficiency of a woman who'd learned long ago not to waste time on fools. Caleb paid. Howard took the money without meeting his eyes. As Caleb turned to leave, one of the railroad workers, a thick-necked man named Sullivan, spoke up. Heard Merrick's got legal papers. Says those kids are his. Then he heard wrong, Caleb said. Law's the law. So's decency. Sullivan grinned. Decency don't sign papers, Thornwood. Caleb walked out. Behind him, he heard the word again, whispered but clear, labor camp. He loaded the supplies into the wagon. Emmett sat in the back with the twins, his face pale, his eyes watching everything. They hate you now, the boy said quietly. Some of them always did, Caleb replied. Just got an excuse now. The sound of boots on frozen boardwalk made him turn. Pearl came out of the store, a small bundle in her hands. She handed it to Emmett. "Peppermint sticks," she said, "for you and your brother and sister." Emmett stared at her like she'd handed him gold. "Thank you, ma'am." Pearl looked at Caleb. "There's talk, Caleb. Bad talk. Be careful." "I intend to." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Merrick was in the telegraph office yesterday. Sent 3 messages, all coded. I couldn't read them, but—" She trailed off, glancing around. "Just watch yourself." Caleb nodded. Pearl squeezed his arm once, then walked back inside. The summons came that evening. Sheriff Burdock rode up alone this time, his face grim. He dismounted slowly, like a man going to a funeral. "Don't make this harder than it is, Caleb." "Come inside, Tom. It's cold." They sat at the kitchen table. Caleb poured coffee. The twins were asleep by the fire. Emmett sat in the corner, quiet as a shadow, listening. The sheriff pulled a document from his coat, set it on the table. Caleb read it. Last will and testament of John Hayes. Executor, Douglas Merrick. Guardian of minor children, Douglas Merrick. The signature at the bottom looked like John Hayes's handwriting. The date was 3 months before the wagon accident. "That ain't real," Caleb said. "Judge Holloway certified it." John Hayes wouldn't name Merrick guardian. They hated each other. The sheriff rubbed his face. "I don't know what to tell you, Caleb. This is legal, signed, sealed. The judge says it's legitimate." John Hayes was murdered. The words came out harder than Caleb intended. The sheriff's head snapped up. "That's a hell of an accusation." "Their wagon burned," Caleb said. "On a clear night, on a road they'd traveled 1,000 times. Accidents happen? Not like that." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very carefully, "You got proof?" Caleb had nothing, just a boy's whisper and a feeling in his gut. "Tom, you know me. You know I wouldn't do this without reason." "I do know you." The sheriff stood, put his hat back on. "And that's the only reason I'm giving you time. But Caleb, listen to me. Judge Holloway signed that will. Merrick's got the law on his side. If you don't turn those children over, he can have you arrested for custodial interference. And I'll have no choice but to do it." He walked to the door, then stopped, turned back. 3 days, he said quietly. "I'll give you 3 days to figure something out. After that, my hands are tied." The door closed. The latch clicked. Caleb sat at the table, staring at the forged will. Emmett crept closer. His voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Thornwood?" "Yeah, son." "That ain't my pa's writing." Caleb looked at the boy. "You sure?" "Yes, sir. Pa always made his capital J with a loop. That one's got a hook." Emmett's small finger pointed to the signature. "And he never spelled out Douglas. He always wrote D. Merrick when he had to write his name. Said it hurt his hand less." Caleb studied the signature again. The boy was right. It was close. Good enough to fool a judge who didn't know John Hayes, but not perfect. "How old are you, Emmett?" 9. 9, sir. "You're a smart 9. The boy didn't smile. "Smart don't matter if he's got the law." Caleb folded the paper, set it aside. "Then we get smarter than the law." Outside, the wind picked up. It rattled the shutters and moaned through the eaves. The sound of it was lonely and vast, the sound of a Montana winter that didn't care about legal papers or dead parents or 9-year-old boys trying to save their family. The twins slept on, unaware, but Emmett stared into the fire, his arms wrapped around his knees, his 2 small boots still laced tight on his feet. And Caleb Thornwood, millionaire rancher, widower, and the loneliest man in the territory, made a decision. He didn't care what the law said. These children were staying. Douglas Merrick could come take them over his dead body. Pearl Whitmore's telegraph office sat above the general store, a narrow room that smelled of oil and paper. The key was silent when Caleb climbed the stairs 2 nights later. Pearl looked up from her desk, lamplight catching the deep lines around her eyes. "Figured you'd come," she said. Caleb closed the door behind him. The room was warm, heated by a small stove in the corner. The sound of the telegraph key sat ready on the desk, brass and silent. "Those coded messages Merrick sent," Caleb said. "Can you remember them?" Pearl stood, moved to a locked drawer, and pulled out a small notebook. "I write down everything that seems wrong. Habit from when my husband ran the office. He said telegraph operators see the world's secrets before anyone else." She opened the notebook, ran her finger down a page. February 3rd, Merrick to Albany. Estate liquidation complete by March 15th, stop. February 4th, Merrick to someone in Helena, no name. Confirm survey results, stop. Proceed as planned. Stop. Caleb's pulse quickened. Survey results? That's what it said. And the third message? Pearl hesitated. She glanced at the door, then back to Caleb. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. February 5th. Sent to a rail camp outside Butte. Package secured. Stop April 28th. Final stop, no complications. The room went very quiet. Even the stove seemed to hold its breath. Package, Caleb said. That's what worried me. Pearl's hand trembled slightly as she closed the notebook. Caleb, I think he's not just taking those children for guardianship. I think he's liquidating the Hayes estate. All of it. The land, the cattle, everything. And those kids are just in the way. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. We've got 2 months to prove fraud. Less than that. Once he liquidates, the money's gone. Offshore, probably. You'll never see it again. Pearl sat down heavily. And Judge Holloway will rubber stamp anything he puts in front of her. Why? What's Merrick got on her? I don't know, but she's been signing his papers for 6 months now. Every foreclosure, every estate transfer, it's like she's in his pocket. Caleb stood at the window, looking down at the dark street. A few lights burned in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys gray against the night sky. I need help, he said quietly. You've got it. Reverend Grant's been asking about you. Says he wants to talk. About what? He didn't say. But Caleb? Pearl's voice softened. He knew the Hayes family. He married John and Mary. If anyone can prove that will is forged, it's him. Caleb nodded. I'll ride out tomorrow. Pearl stood, moved to the stove, and tapped her fingers on the iron surface. A strange rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 tap. What's that? Caleb asked. She looked embarrassed. Just a nervous habit. I hear Morse code all day. Sometimes my hands remember it even when my head doesn't. But Caleb noticed she was staring at her notebook when she said it. He left the telegraph office with more questions than answers, but he had one thing he didn't have before. An ally. The dawn came brutal and beautiful. Caleb woke at 4, same as always, and dressed in the dark. The cabin was quiet except for the soft breathing of the children. He found Emmett, already awake, sitting by the window, watching the sky turn from black to gray. You don't sleep much, Caleb said. No, sir. Bad dreams? The boy nodded. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee, added extra sugar to 1, and handed it to Emmett. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle. Come with me, Caleb said. They dressed warm, heavy coats, wool scarves, gloves. The cold outside was sharp enough to cut. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, a pale line of gold on the horizon. Caleb led Emmett to the water trough. A thick layer of ice had formed overnight, solid, unbreakable looking. Caleb handed the boy an iron bar. A rancher's first duty is to his herd. Cattle can't drink if the water's frozen. They'll die of thirst, with a trough full of ice. Emmett took the bar. It was heavy in his small hands. You break this ice every morning, Caleb said. Every single morning. No matter how cold, no matter how tired. You do it because it has to be done. Because the animals depend on you. Because a man takes care of what's his. Emmett lifted the bar, brought it down. The ice cracked, but didn't break. Again. The boy swung again, and again. On the 4th strike, the ice shattered. Water, black and cold, welled up beneath. The cattle smelled it immediately. They came, pushing against the fence, their breath steaming, their tongues lapping at the frigid water. Emmett's hands were shaking. The bar had torn through his thin gloves. His palms were bleeding. Caleb took the bar, set it down, and pulled off his own gloves. They were old, thick leather, worn soft with decades of use. His father had given them to him when he turned 10. He'd worn them for 40 years. He held them out to Emmett. These were my pa's. Then they were mine. Now they're yours. The boy stared at them like they were made of gold. I can't. You just did a man's work. You earned them. Emmett slipped the gloves on. They were too big, but they fit well enough. He flexed his fingers, feeling the softness of the leather. Mr. Thornwood? Yeah, son? Why are you helping us? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the snow. The smell of wood smoke drifted from the cabin. The sound of the cattle drinking was peaceful, normal. Because nobody helped me when I needed it, Caleb said finally. My wife died, then my daughter, And I sat in that cabin for 8 years, alone, because I thought that was what I deserved. Punishment for failing them. He looked at the boy. But you came to my gate, and you weren't asking for punishment. You were asking for help. For them. He nodded toward the cabin, where the twins still slept. A man who drags his brother and sister through a blizzard on a sled he built himself. That's not a boy. That's a rancher. Emmett's eyes welled up. He turned away quickly, ashamed of the tears. Caleb put a hand on his shoulder. It's all right to cry, son. Crying don't make you weak. Quitting does, and you didn't quit. They stood together in the dawn cold, the steam of their breath mixing with the steam from the cattle, and for the first time in 8 years, Caleb Thornwood didn't feel alone. Come on, he said. Let's get breakfast. You got ice to break again tomorrow. Emmett smiled, just a little, but it was there. Behind them, the sun climbed higher and the ice at the edges of the trough began, very slowly, to melt. The town meeting was called for February 18th. Caleb heard about it from 3 different people before he even made it to the general store. That's how he knew it was a setup. The church hall was packed. Every bench filled, men standing along the walls. The potbelly stove in the corner worked overtime, but the room still felt cold, smelled of wet wool and tobacco and something sour, fear, maybe, or anger. Caleb walked in with Reverend Isaiah Grant at his side. The Reverend was a tall man, lean as a rail, with white hair and the kind of face that had seen war and come out the other side believing in something bigger than himself. The talking stopped when they entered. Douglas Merrick stood at the front beside a makeshift podium. He looked fresh, clean-shaven. His suit probably cost more than most men in the room made in a year. Sheriff Burdock stood off to the side, his face carefully neutral. "Ah, Mr. Thornwood," Merrick said, his voice carrying easily. "Good of you to join us." Caleb didn't answer. He took a seat near the back. The Reverend sat beside him. Mrs. Crenshaw sat 2 rows up, her neck craned to watch. The railroad workers clustered near the stove, arms crossed. The ranchers, Miguel Santos, Ben Hollis, old Pete Garrison, sat closer to Caleb, their faces hard. Merrick cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, ladies, we're here tonight to discuss a matter of community safety." He let that word hang, safety. As you all know, 3 orphaned children were found at Thornwood Ranch 2 weeks ago. The Hayes children, their parents, God rest them, died in a tragic wagon accident last November. A few murmurs, heads nodding. Now, I have been appointed by the court as executor of the Hayes estate and legal guardian of these children. I have the documentation. Judge Holloway herself certified it. He held up the papers. Let everyone see the official seal. But Mr. Thornwood has refused to turn the children over to my care. He has, in fact, kept them isolated on his ranch. 3 small children, alone with a man who has lived as a hermit for 8 years. The murmurs grew louder. Caleb felt the eyes on him. "I'm not here to cast aspersions," Merrick continued, his tone all reason and concern. "But we must ask ourselves, is this arrangement in the best interest of the children? A wealthy man, living alone, suddenly taking in 3 orphans, no wife, no family. What are his intentions?" There it was again, that word. Miguel Santos stood up. He was a short, stocky man with hands like granite and a thick accent. "You saying Caleb's a danger to them kids?" "I'm saying we don't know," Merrick replied smoothly. "And until we do, shouldn't we err on the side of caution?" "Caution," Ben Hollis spat. He was a rancher from the next valley over, broad-shouldered and blunt. "You mean control. You want them kids so you can sell off the Hayes land without anybody asking questions." The room erupted, shouts from both sides, the railroadmen yelling at the ranchers. Mrs. Crenshaw's shrill voice cutting through, "It ain't natural!" Sheriff Burdock stepped forward. "All right, settle down. We'll put it to a vote." "A vote?" Reverend Grant stood, his voice quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "Since when do we vote on a man's character?" "Since the law requires an investigation," Merrick said. "If the vote passes, Sheriff Burdock will be required to inspect Thornwood Ranch, to ensure the children are being properly cared for." "And if I refuse the inspection?" Caleb asked. "Then I'll have grounds to remove the children immediately, for their protection." It was a trap, perfectly laid. Vote yes, and Caleb gets investigated, harassed, labeled a threat. Vote no, and Merrick looks like the reasonable one who tried to follow procedure. The vote was called. 23 hands went up in favor. Railroad workers, merchants who depended on railroad business, Mrs. Crenshaw and her circle of gossips, 19 against, ranchers, a few of the older women. Pearl Whitmore, sitting in the back, her face grim. Sheriff Burdock sighed. Motion passes. Caleb, I'll be by tomorrow. Caleb stood, walked out, didn't look back. The Reverend followed him into the cold night. The stars were out, hard and bright and indifferent. That was about more than children, the Reverend said quietly. I know. He's dividing the town, railroad against ranchers. It's the old fight. Caleb stared at the frozen street. He's winning. Not yet. The Reverend put a hand on his shoulder. I'm riding to the territorial capital tomorrow. If that will is forged, there'll be records, marriage licenses, birth certificates, something that proves those children belong to John and Mary Hayes, not to Merrick's legal fiction. That's 3 days' ride in this weather. I've ridden in worse. The Reverend smiled. Besides, I was a Union chaplain. I've seen what happens when good men stay quiet. I won't do it again. He mounted his horse, an old gray gelding that looked as tough as its rider. Hold the line, Caleb. I'll be back by April 1st. If I'm not, you will be. The Reverend nodded once, then rode off into the darkness, his breath and the horse's breath mingling in white clouds that disappeared into the night. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a lantern burning low and Pearl's notebook open in front of him. She lent it to him after the meeting, pressed it into his hands with a look that said, "Be careful." He read the coded messages again. Estate liquidation, survey results, package secured. It wasn't about guardianship. It never had been. He was about to close the notebook when he saw something he'd missed before. A message from 3 months ago, November 10th, 1888, 2 days before the Hayes wagon burned. Handle Hayes problem stop wagon route logged, stop, make it look accidental stop. Recipient, Rail Camp, Butte, no name, just a station code. Caleb's blood went cold. He read it again, then a third time. Handle Hayes problem, make it look accidental. It wasn't a wagon accident, it was murder. Douglas Merrick had killed John and Mary Hayes for their land, and now he was coming for their children. Caleb stood so fast his chair tipped over. The crash woke Emmett. The boy appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide and frightened in the lamplight. Mr. Thornwood? Caleb crossed the room, knelt down, and gripped the boy's shoulders. Not hard, but firm, the way you hold someone when you need them to understand something true. Emmett, listen to me. What happened to your parents? It wasn't an accident. The boy's face went very still. I know, Emmett whispered. I saw the man. The words hit Caleb like a hammer. You saw him? He was standing by a tree, 40 yards from the road. He threw something, a bottle with fire in it. It hit the wagon wheel. Emmett's voice was shaking but steady. Mama saw it too. She pushed me into the bushes, told me to hide. Then she went back for Grace and Samuel, but the fire... His voice broke. Caleb pulled the boy close, let him cry into his shoulder. The sound was awful. The sound of a child who'd seen too much and carried it alone for too long. When the tears finally stopped, Caleb pulled back, looked Emmett in the eyes. Can you draw what you saw? The road, the tree, where the man was standing. Emmett nodded. Good, because we're going to prove what happened. And we're going to make sure Douglas Merrick never hurts another soul. Outside, the wind picked up. It rattled the shutters and howled through the eaves. The sound of it was vast and merciless. But inside, by the light of a single lantern, a man and a boy bent over a piece of paper and began to draw a map of murder. And in that moment, the tide began to turn. March came in cold and stayed cold. The snow didn't melt so much as settle, turning gray and hard-packed under the horses' hooves. The days grew longer, but not warmer. Ice still formed on the water trough every morning, and every morning Emmett broke it with the iron bar, wearing Caleb's father's gloves. The boy was changing, filling out. His cheeks had color now, his hands were calloused. He moved with the beginning of a rancher's confidence, purposeful, economical, aware. The twins were thriving too. Grace had started to babble, stringing together sounds that almost resembled words. Samuel could pull himself up on the furniture now, his fat baby legs wobbling but strong. Caleb watched them from the kitchen window while he made coffee. The smell of it filled the cabin, bitter and rich and familiar. Outside, Emmett swung the bar one more time, and the ice shattered with a crack that echoed across the valley. The boy turned, saw Caleb watching, and raised one gloved hand. Caleb raised his coffee cup in return. It was a small moment, a nothing moment, but it settled something in Caleb's chest that had been loose and broken for 8 years. He had a family again, and he'd be damned if anyone took it from him. That afternoon, Caleb called Emmett into the kitchen after the twins were down for their nap. He laid out the map the boy had drawn. The road, the ravine, The tree where the man had stood with his fire bottle. "We need to ride out there," Caleb said. "See if there's any evidence left." Emmett's face went pale. "I don't want to go back there." "I know, but if we're going to prove what Merrick did, we need more than a telegram and a drawing. We need something physical, something a judge can't ignore." The boy stared at the map. His small hands, rough now from work, trembled slightly. "What if he's there? What if he's watching?" "Then we'll be careful. You, me, and Pearl. Nobody else." "Why Miss Pearl?" "Because she's smart, and she knows how to document things. If we find evidence, we'll need her to witness it. Make it official." Emmett was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "All right, but I want to bring something." He went to the corner where he kept his small pile of belongings, came back with a tarnished brass compass. "My pa gave me this," Emmett said. "Said a man should always know which way he's heading, even when the world gets turned around." Caleb took the compass, opened it. The needle swung true north, steady and sure despite the scratches on its face. "Your pa was a smart man." "Yes, sir." Caleb handed it back. "You hold on to that. When we ride out there tomorrow, you can navigate." The boy's face lit up. Just a little, but it was there. That evening, Caleb rode into town. The streets were quiet, most folks inside where it was warm. He climbed the stairs to Pearl's telegraph office and knocked twice. She opened the door, her face tired but alert. "Caleb?" "I need your help tomorrow." She listened while he explained. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, tapping that same nervous rhythm on the edge of her desk. Tap, 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 tap. "That's dangerous," she said finally. "If Merrick finds out we're investigating, he's already trying to take the children. Can't get much more dangerous than that." Pearl smiled, but it was sad. "You know what people will say if I ride out with you unchaperoned? A widow and a widower, alone in the wilderness." "Let them talk. They're already talking." She studied him, then nodded. "All right, I'll bring my camera. If there's evidence, we'll photograph it. Make sure it can't be disputed." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We might not find anything." "We will." Pearl tilted her head. "You sound certain." "I am. Men like Merrick get arrogant. They think money and power make them untouchable. They get sloppy." "And if we do find evidence, what then?" Caleb stood, put his hat back on. "Then we take it to the new judge when the Reverend gets back, and we bury Douglas Merrick in his own crimes." That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb sat at the table with a ledger and a pencil. He'd been avoiding this calculation for days, but it couldn't be put off any longer. The Hayes Ranch auction was April 28th, 2 months away. If Merrick won the auction, he'd own the land. He'd liquidate it, sell it to the railroad, and disappear with the money. The children would have nothing, no inheritance, no home. Caleb had to stop that from happening, which meant he had to be prepared to bid. He opened his personal account book, the one his banker and Helena managed, the one nobody in Flat Rock knew about because Caleb lived simply and never talked about money. His father had struck silver in the 1860s, sold the claim for a fortune, invested it carefully. When he died, Caleb inherited everything. Current liquid assets, $480,000. It was an obscene amount of money, more than most men saw in 10 lifetimes. Caleb had barely touched it. What did a man alone need money for? He had his ranch, his cattle, his solitude. But now he had 3 children, and a fight. The Hayes Ranch was worth maybe $50,000 on a good day. Land prices in Montana were still cheap. But if Merrick wanted it badly enough, if there was something on that land worth killing for, he might bid higher. Caleb ran the numbers. If it came down to an auction war, he could go as high as necessary. He could buy the ranch outright, deed it to Emmett, make sure the boy and his siblings had something to inherit, but that would mean exposing his wealth, painting a target on his back, making himself a threat to Merrick not just legally but financially. Men had been killed for less. He closed the ledger, rubbed his tired eyes. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves, the fire crackled. Somewhere in the cabin, Grace made a soft sleeping sound. Caleb looked at the adoption papers he'd started filling out. Still incomplete, still unofficial. Just hope on paper. He picked up the pencil again. In the column marked Father's Name, he wrote carefully, Caleb James Thornwood. In the column marked Children, he wrote Emmett John Hayes, Grace Marie Hayes, Samuel Thomas Hayes. He stared at the words. They looked right. They felt right. But they weren't legal. Not yet, and they wouldn't be unless he could prove Merrick was a fraud and a murderer. He folded the papers, tucked them into his coat pocket, and went to check on the children one last time before bed. Emmett was curled up under a quilt, the brass compass clutched in one hand. The twins were in the makeshift crib Caleb had built, just 2 apple crates lined with soft wool, but they slept soundly. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching them breathe. "I won't let him take you," he whispered. "I don't care what it costs," the wind answered with a long, low howl. But inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and the children slept safe. And for one more night, at least, they were a family. Tomorrow, they'd ride out to find the truth. Tomorrow, the fight would truly begin. They found the site 2 hours after dawn. Emmett navigated with his father's compass, his small voice calling out directions while Pearl rode beside him and Caleb led the way on his big bay gelding. The road was exactly as the boy had drawn it. A long curve following the edge of a ravine, trees thick on one side, a drop on the other, the kind of place where a wagon could go over easy if something went wrong, or if someone made it go wrong. "There," Emmett said, pointing to a lightning-scarred pine about 40 yards off the road. "That's where the man stood." They dismounted. The ground was still frozen, but patches of bare earth showed where the snow had melted. The smell of pine sap and cold stone hung in the air. Caleb walked slowly, scanning the ground. Pearl followed with her camera, a heavy box affair that required a tripod. Emmett stayed close to Caleb, his hand gripping the compass so tight his knuckles went white. "What are we looking for?" Pearl asked. "Anything that doesn't belong. Broken glass, metal, burn marks." They searched for 20 minutes, found nothing but pine needles and old snow. Then Emmett stopped. "Mr. Thornwood." He was pointing at the base of the scarred pine. Caleb knelt, brushed away the needles. There, half buried in the frozen dirt, shards of thick green glass, and something else, a twisted piece of metal maybe 3 inches long, blackened on one end. Caleb picked it up carefully, smelled it. Kerosene. Faint, but still there after 3 months. "Pearl." She came over with the camera, set up the tripod. The shutter clicked. Once, twice, 3 times from different angles. "This is a whiskey bottleneck," Caleb said, holding up the glass. "The kind with a rag stuffed in it. You light the rag, throw the bottle, it breaks and ignites." "A Molotov cocktail," Pearl said quietly. "We used them in the war." Emmett's face had gone very pale. "That's what he threw. I saw the fire inside it." Caleb bagged the glass carefully in a cloth. Then he stood, walked to the edge of the ravine, and looked down. The wagon wreckage was still there. Burned timber, twisted metal wheels, the bones of 2 horses picked clean by scavengers, and something else. He scrambled down the slope, boots slipping on loose stone. Pearl called after him, but he didn't stop. He could see it now, half hidden under a collapsed wagon side. A metal strongbox, locked, the kind used for documents. He hauled it up the slope, muscles burning, set it on the road with a heavy thud. The lock was rusted but intact. Caleb used the butt of his knife to break it. The box opened with a groan of old metal. Inside, papers. Water-stained but readable. Land deed, original, John Hayes' name. Dated 1875, marriage certificate, John Hayes and Mary Eleanor Preston. 1878, birth certificates, Emmett John Hayes, Grace Marie Hayes, Samuel Thomas Hayes, and one more document, a geological survey, dated October 1888, commissioned by the Montana Central Railroad. Caleb read it twice to make sure he understood. "Silver," he said. Pearl looked over his shoulder. "What?" "There's a silver vein under the Hayes Ranch. A big one. Survey estimates it's worth $2 million. The number hung in the cold air like a death sentence. "That's why he killed them," Caleb said. "The railroad wants to run a spur line to access the mine, but they needed the land, and John Hayes wouldn't sell." Pearl's hands shook as she photographed every document. "Merrick's the railroad's attorney. He handles all their land acquisitions." So he manufactured a solution. Kill the parents, forge a will, become guardian, liquidate the estate, sell the land to his client for a fraction of its value. Probably gets a cut of the mining profits. Emmett sat on a rock, his face blank with shock. $2 million? Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your parents died because they stood between greedy men and a fortune. But we have proof now," Pearl said. She was already packing up her camera. "This survey, the bottle, the original deed, we can take this to—" The sound of hoofbeats cut her off. 3 riders, coming fast up the road from the west. Caleb's hand went to his rifle, but it was too late. They were already surrounded. The lead rider was a thick man with a scarred face and dead eyes. He wore a railroad company coat. Behind him, 2 more men, both armed. "Well now," the scarred man said. His voice had the flat accent of someone who'd done hard time. "Mr. Merrick said you might come poking around. Looks like he was right." Caleb stepped in front of Emmett and Pearl. "We're just passing through." "With a camera and a strongbox? Don't insult my intelligence." He spat tobacco juice on the frozen ground. "Mr. Merrick wants that box, and he wants it now. Tell Merrick if he wants it, he can come get it himself." The scarred man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant sight. "He figured you'd say that. That's why he sent us." He nodded to his men. They drew their pistols. Pearl's breath came fast. Emmett pressed against Caleb's back. Caleb's mind raced. 3 armed men, a woman and a child to protect. 40 yards to cover, no chance of outrunning them. He was calculating odds when he heard it, a sound like thunder, but not from the sky, from the road behind them. The scarred man's head snapped around. His face went pale. Coming up the road at a full gallop were 20 riders, ranchers, every man from the valley who'd voted against the investigation. Miguel Santos in the lead, his Winchester across his saddle, Ben Hollis beside him, old Pete Garrison, even young Tommy Chin, barely 18, with his father's rifle. They pulled up in a cloud of frozen mud, surrounding Merrick's men with a wall of horseflesh and iron. Miguel's voice was quiet, but it carried. "I don't think you understand how things work here. We take care of our own, and Caleb's one of ours." The scarred man looked at his odds. 3 men against 20. He was many things, but he wasn't stupid. "Mr. Merrick's going to hear about this." "You tell him," Caleb said. "Tell him we found his murder weapon. Tell him we found the survey. And tell him we're not afraid anymore." The scarred man jerked his horse around. His men followed. They rode off at a gallop, disappearing into the tree line. The ranchers stayed until they were out of sight. Then Miguel rode close, leaned down from his saddle. "We figured you might need backup. Pearl sent word yesterday through her telegraph." Caleb looked at Pearl. She shrugged. "I told you I write down everything, including which ranchers I can trust." Ben Hollis nodded at the strongbox. "That what I think it is?" "Evidence," Caleb said. "Enough to hang Douglas Merrick." "Then let's make sure it gets to the right people." Miguel turned his horse. "We'll escort you back to town. All of us. Let Merrick try something with 20 witnesses." They rode back in formation, Caleb and Emmett and Pearl in the center, the ranchers around them like a protective wall. And in Caleb's saddlebag, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, was the proof that would either save 3 children or get them all killed. The mountain wind was starting to smell different. Less like ice, more like thaw. Spring was coming, and with it, a reckoning. The raid came on the night of March 25th. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke, not the clean smell of wood stove or fireplace, the thick chemical smell of kerosene and burning hay. He was out of bed before he was fully awake, pulling on boots, grabbing his rifle. Through the window he saw it, his hay barn, 200 yards from the house, engulfed in orange flames that lit the night sky like a false dawn. "Emmett," he shouted, "get the twins to the root cellar, now!" The boy appeared, already moving, Grace in one arm and Samuel in the other. Caleb had drilled them on this, in case Merrick came, in case things went bad. The root cellar was built into the hillside behind the house, stone walls, heavy door, stocked with water and blankets. It could withstand anything short of dynamite. Emmett ran, his bare feet slapping on the cold floor, and Caleb heard the cellar door slam shut. He moved to the front window, rifle ready. 3 riders circled the burning barn, dark shapes against the fire. One of them held a torch. As Caleb watched, the man rode close to the equipment shed and hurled the torch through the open door. Flames erupted. Caleb's jaw clenched. The shed held tools, spare tack, months of work. He raised the rifle, sighted on the nearest rider, then stopped. If he fired, they'd fire back. The house was wood. One well-placed shot with a fire arrow, and he'd lose everything, including the children. He lowered the rifle, watched the barn collapse in on itself with a roar that shook the ground, watched the shed burn, watched the riders circle once more, then gallop off into the darkness. When the hoofbeats faded, he ran to the cellar, pounded on the door. "It's me! You can come out!" Emmett emerged first, the twins clutching his shoulders. The boy's face was white, but his hands were steady. "They're gone," Caleb said. "You're safe." They stood together on the hillside and watched the barn burn. The sound of it was enormous, crackling, roaring, the occasional crash as a beam gave way. The smell of burning hay and wood filled the valley. By the time the sun rose, half the county had gathered. The ranchers came first, riding hard with buckets and shovels. Then the townspeople. Even some of the railroad workers, shamefaced, helped beat back the flames before they could spread to the house. Sheriff Burdock arrived at dawn. He dismounted slowly, surveying the destruction, then walked to where Caleb stood covered in soot. Anyone hurt? No. You see who did it? 3 men, too dark to identify. The sheriff picked something up from the ashes near the barn foundation, a piece of charred wood. He brought it over. Nailed to the wood was a piece of paper, singed but readable. Mind your own, Thornwood. Next time it's the house. The sheriff's face went hard. That's a death threat. That's a promise. I'll investigate. But Caleb, he lowered his voice. Judge Holloway's already signed an emergency custody order. Merrick filed it yesterday. Says you're creating a dangerous environment for the children. With this fire, he's got evidence to back it up. Caleb's blood went cold. When? Orders effective April 1st. 3 days from now. If you don't turn the children over voluntarily, I'll have to arrest you for custodial interference. He burned my barn to justify taking them. I know, but I can't prove it. And the law doesn't care what I know. It cares what I can prove. The sheriff put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. It was the closest he'd come to choosing a side. Get a lawyer, get evidence, get something, because in 3 days, my hands are tied. He rode away. Pearl appeared at Caleb's elbow. Her face was grim. The photographs are developed. I have copies hidden in 3 different places. The survey, the bottle, the documents. It's all documented. Where's Reverend Grant? Not back yet. He should have been here 2 days ago. Caleb felt the trap closing. No reverend, no marriage license, no way to prove the children's legal heir status, and now a court order giving Merrick custody. Miguel Santos came over, his face black with soot. We can help, Caleb. Every rancher here will testify Merrick's behind this. Won't matter without legal standing. Judge Holloway owns the court. Then we ride to Helena, file an appeal with the territorial governor. That takes weeks. I've got 3 days. The sun climbed higher. The burned barn smoked and steamed. People drifted away, back to their own ranches, their own problems. By noon, only Caleb and the children remained. He stood in the ruins of the barn, the smell of ash thick in his throat, and made a decision. He couldn't win in court, not in 3 days, not with Judge Holloway signing whatever Merrick put in front of her, but he could win at auction. If the Hayes Ranch was what Merrick wanted, if the silver under that land was worth $2 million, then Caleb would take it from him. He'd buy the ranch himself, bid whatever it took, and once he owned it, he'd deed it to Emmett. Merrick could have legal custody all he wanted, but he'd never get the land, never get the silver, never profit from murder. It would cost Caleb everything he had, his entire fortune. But what was money compared to justice? Compared to 3 children who'd lost everything already? He walked back to the house, found Emmett sitting on the porch steps, the twins playing in the dirt at his feet. The boy looked up, his face streaked with soot. Are they going to take us? Caleb sat down beside him. Not if I can help it. How? There's an auction April 28th for your family's ranch. I'm going to buy it, and then I'm going to give it back to you. Emmett stared at him. That costs money. I have money. How much? Caleb looked at the boy, at his serious face and his 2 old eyes, at the father's compass still hanging from his belt loop. Enough, Caleb said, however much it takes. That afternoon, Caleb rode to town one more time. He needed to saw his banker, needed to liquidate assets, needed to be ready, but first he stopped at the cemetery. His wife's grave was on the hill overlooking the valley, his daughters beside it. He knelt between them, his hat in his hands, and for the first time in 8 years, he spoke to them. I couldn't save you, he said quietly. I failed you both, and I've carried that for a long time. The wind moved through the grass. A meadowlark sang somewhere nearby. Spring sounds, life sounds. But maybe I can save them. Emmett and Grace and Samuel. Maybe that's why they came to my gate. Maybe that's my second chance. He stood, brushed the dirt from his knees. I'm going to spend everything I have, and if I die doing it, I'll die knowing I tried. That's more than I've done in 8 years. He put his hat back on, started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. I love you both. I always will, but I got to let go now. I got to move forward. I got to be someone's father again. The graves didn't answer, but somehow the silence felt like permission. Caleb walked back to his horse, mounted up, and rode toward town with the smell of smoke still in his clothes and the weight of a decision in his chest. 3 days until the custody order took effect, 4 weeks until the auction, and one man standing between 3 children and a killer. The odds weren't good, but for the first time in 8 years, Caleb Thornwood felt like a man with something worth fighting for. April 28th dawned clear and warm, the kind of spring morning that made men believe in second chances. The snow was gone except for patches in the deepest shade. The creek ran high and loud with snowmelt. Meadowlarks sang from the fence posts. Caleb dressed carefully, his good suit, his father's pocket watch. He braided his hair back the way he used to before his wife died. Made himself look like a man worth $500,000. Emmett watched from the doorway, wearing clean clothes Pearl had bought for him. The twins were with Pearl and Reverend Grant, who'd returned 3 days ago with the marriage license and a black eye from a run-in with railroad thugs outside Helena. "You ready?" Caleb asked. The boy nodded. He touched the bulge under his shirt where the brass compass hung. "Whatever happens today," Caleb said, "you remember something. You're a Hayes. That land is yours by blood and law. No piece of paper Merrick bought can change that." They rode into town together. The courthouse steps were packed, 200 people, maybe more. Every rancher in the territory, railroad workers, merchants, curious onlookers who'd heard about the fight and wanted to see how it ended. An auction platform had been erected on the steps. Behind it, a banner, Hayes Family Ranch, 46 acres, foreclosure sale. Douglas Merrick stood near the platform in a pristine gray suit, his hands clasped behind his back, his face confident. Judge Holloway sat in a chair to the side, her expression carefully neutral. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice like a carnival barker. He banged his gavel at precisely 10 o'clock. "Gentlemen, ladies, we are here to auction the Hayes Family Ranch, 640 acres of prime Montana grazing land, timber rights, water rights, mineral rights included." That last phrase made Merrick smile. "Starting bid is $10,000. Do I hear 10? Merrick raised his hand. 10,000. 15, Caleb said. The crowd murmured. Merrick turned, saw Caleb for the first time, and his smile faltered. 20,000, Merrick said. 30, Caleb replied. The bidding escalated. 50,000, 75, 100,000. The crowd fell silent, watching the two men face each other across the courthouse steps. At 100,000, Merrick hesitated. That was already twice what the land was worth on paper. But Caleb knew what was under that land, and so did Merrick. 150,000, Merrick said. 200,000, Caleb countered. Gasps from the crowd. That was a fortune. More money than most of them would see in 10 lifetimes. Merrick's face had gone red. He was sweating now despite the cool morning. His investors were in the crowd, watching. If he failed to secure this land, he'd be ruined. 250,000, Merrick said, his voice tight. 300,000, Caleb said calmly. The auctioneer looked like he might faint. $300,000. Do I hear 350? Merrick turned to a man behind him, one of his railroad investors. They had a hurried, whispered conversation. The investor shook his head, walked away. Merrick's face went pale. 350,000, he said, but his voice cracked. Caleb stepped forward, looked Merrick dead in the eyes. $400,000 to $80,000, he said. Every cent I have in this world. The silence was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The auctioneer's voice trembled. 480,000, do I hear? 500,000, Merrick screamed. But the investor was already gone. Merrick had no backing, no money, just desperation. The auctioneer looked at him. Sir, do you have proof of funds? Merrick fumbled for papers. Came up empty. His hands were shaking. I can secure financing. Give me an hour. The auction is cash or certified bank draft, the auctioneer said. Do you have a draft? Merrick's face collapsed. Going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Wait, Reverend Grant's voice rang out. He stood up from the crowd, holding a leather folder. Before this sale concludes, the court needs to see something. He climbed the steps. Judge Holloway frowned. Reverend, this is highly irregular. So is fraud, Your Honor. He opened the folder, pulled out the marriage certificate. This proves Mary Eleanor Preston married John Hayes in 1878. This, he pulled out 3 birth certificates, proves their children, Emmett, Grace, and Samuel Hayes. He produced the original land deed from the strongbox. This is the original deed, dated 1875, never transferred, never sold. John Hayes owned that land free and clear when he died. Merrick lunged forward. That's irrelevant. I have a will. You have a forgery. Reverend Grant pulled out the will Merrick had filed, held it next to a letter from the Territorial Records Office. The signatures don't match. I had a handwriting expert examine them. John Hayes never signed this will. You forged it. The crowd erupted. Shouts, accusations. Sheriff Burdock moved toward Merrick, his hand on his pistol. There's more, Pearl said, stepping forward. She held up photographs. This is the site of the Hayes wagon accident. This is a Molotov bottle. This is a geological survey showing $2 million in silver under the Hayes Ranch. She turned to the crowd. Douglas Merrick murdered John and Mary Hayes for their land. Then he forged documents to steal their children's inheritance. Merrick's face went from red to white. He backed away from the platform. This is slander. I'll sue every one of you, Wait. You'll hang, Miguel Santos said, standing up. We got 20 witnesses to your men burning Caleb's barn. We got your threatening note. We got your telegraph messages ordering the murder. Merrick looked around wildly, saw no allies, no escape. Every face in the crowd was turned against him. He ran, made it 3 steps before Sheriff Burdock tackled him to the ground. The sound of iron cuffs clicking shut was the sweetest sound Caleb had ever heard. The sheriff hauled Merrick to his feet, read the charges: murder conspiracy, fraud, arson, attempted kidnapping. Judge Holloway stood, her face carefully blank. Sheriff, I'll need to recuse myself from this case. Potential conflict of interest. You'll need to do more than that, Your Honor, the Reverend said quietly. We have copies of every document you certified for Mr. Merrick. The territorial governor will want to review them. Her face went gray. She didn't argue. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Given the circumstances, this auction is void. The Hayes Ranch reverts to the legal heirs. He looked at Emmett. Son, you just inherited 640 acres. Emmett stared at him, then at Caleb. Caleb knelt down, pulled the boy close. It's yours, he said. Your mama and papa's land. Your land now. But you were going to buy it. You were going to give me everything. I was. But I don't have to now. Caleb smiled. Justice did it for me. The crowd started to applaud. Slowly at first, then louder. The ranchers cheered. Even some of the railroad workers joined in. Pearl hugged the Reverend. Miguel clapped Caleb on the back, hard enough to hurt. And Emmett Hayes, 9 years old, stood on the courthouse steps and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from the weight of 3 months finally lifting from his small shoulders. Caleb held him, let him cry, let the boy be a child again just for a moment. When the tears stopped, Emmett looked up. What happens now? Now, Caleb said, we go home. The new judge arrived from Helena 2 weeks later, a stern woman named Margaret Crowley who'd heard about the case and volunteered personally. She had a reputation for hating corruption and loving procedure. The hearing took less than an hour. Judge Holloway had already resigned, facing territorial investigation. Douglas Merrick sat in jail, awaiting trial for murder conspiracy, fraud, and arson. The evidence was overwhelming. Pearl's photographs, the surveyor's testimony, the telegraph records, Emmett's eyewitness account. The prosecutor expected a conviction within 3 months, 15 years minimum. Judge Crowley reviewed the Hayes children's case with the efficiency of a woman who'd seen too many orphans and too few happy endings. Mr. Thornwood, she said, you're petitioning for legal guardianship of 3 minor children. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. You're a 52-year-old unmarried man. You live alone on an isolated ranch. You have no experience raising children. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's correct. And yet, you were willing to spend your entire fortune to protect these children. $480,000. Is that also correct? Yes, Your Honor. She looked at him over her reading glasses. Why? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because they needed someone, and I needed to be needed. Judge Crowley made a note, turned to Emmett, who sat beside Caleb in his good clothes, the brass compass visible on his belt. Emmett Hayes, do you wish to remain in Mr. Thornwood's care? Yes, ma'am. Why? The boy looked at Caleb, then back at the judge. Because he taught me how to break ice, how to be a rancher, how to take care of things. He paused. He gave me his pa's gloves. Nobody ever gave me something that mattered before. The judge's stern face softened. Just a fraction. She stamped the papers. Guardianship approved. Legal adoption finalized. Emmett John Thornwood Hayes. Grace Marie Thornwood Hayes. Samuel Thomas Thornwood Hayes. She looked at Caleb. "Congratulations, Mr. Thornwood. You're a father." Caleb's throat went tight. He couldn't speak, just nodded. Outside the courthouse, the ranchers were waiting. They'd brought a wagon, decorated with spring wildflowers. Pearl had organized it, a celebration. They rode through town, the children laughing, the ranchers cheering. Someone had repaired the church bell, the one that had been broken since 1885. Reverend Grant stood at the church steps, the bell rope in his hands. He looked at Emmett. "You want to do the honors?" Emmett climbed down from the wagon, took the rope, pulled. The bell rang out across the valley, clear and loud and true. The sound of it echoed off the mountains, carrying for miles. People came out of houses, stopped in the street, listened. It was the sound of something broken being mended, something lost being found, the sound of hope. That evening they had dinner at the ranch. The whole valley, it seemed. Pearl brought pies. Miguel brought beef. The ranchers brought vegetables and bread and wine. They set up tables in the yard where the barn had been. The twins toddled through the grass, chasing butterflies. Grace had started saying "Dada," which made Caleb's eyes sting every time. Samuel could walk now, his fat legs steady, his laugh pure joy. Emmett stood at the water trough as the sun set, the iron bar in his hands, Caleb's father's gloves on his fingers. He raised the bar, brought it down. The ice, thin now, barely forming in the warmer nights, shattered easily. The cattle came to drink. Caleb watched from the porch, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. Pearl sat beside him, knitting something small and blue. "You did good," she said quietly. "We did good. What will you do now? You're broke, you know. Spent everything on an auction you didn't even win." Caleb smiled. "I've got a ranch, cattle, 3 children. That's more wealth than most men ever see." "In the Hayes Ranch? Emmett can't work it alone." "Then I'll help him. We'll combine the operations. Run them together until he's old enough to take over, if he wants to." "He will. That boy's a rancher through and through." The sun dropped below the mountains, the valley filled with soft purple twilight. The smell of spring grass and wood smoke and fresh earth hung in the air. Reverend Grant came over with 2 of the twins on his hip. "Time for bed, Caleb. These 2 are falling asleep standing up." Caleb took his children inside, tucked them into the crib he'd made, sang the lullaby his wife had sung to their daughter. When he came back outside, Emmett was still at the trough, staring at the mountains. The boy turned as Caleb approached. "Thank you," Emmett said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us." Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're my son now. Sons don't get given up on." They stood together in the twilight, the rancher and the boy, and watched the first stars appear. Behind them, the house glowed with lamplight and the sound of family. Ahead of them, spring stretched green and endless, and for the first time in 8 years, Caleb Thornwood wasn't alone. He was home. Now, folks ask me sometimes if it was worth it. $500,000 for 3 children who weren't even my blood. I tell them this. I didn't spend that money. I invested it in the only thing that lasts, family. See, when I found that boy at my gate, dragging his brother and sister through a blizzard on a travois he built from fence scraps, I saw something I'd forgotten. I saw what a man's supposed to be. Not rich, not powerful, just present. When the night's cold and the world's cruel, you show up, you break the ice, you share the fire. Emmett didn't need my money. Turned out he had his own land, his own inheritance. What he needed was my hands. Same hands that failed my Sarah. Well, they didn't fail his sisters. Ain't redemption a strange mercy? By that first summer, the valley looked different. Same mountains, same creek, same cattle. But the sound, oh, the sound. A church bell that had been silent for 4 years, ringing out over the pines. A boy learning the weight of an iron bar at dawn. 2 babies laughing in the meadow grass. Douglas Merrick got 20 years for conspiracy to murder. Judge Holloway lost her bench and her pension. The railroad found their silver, but they had to lease the land from Emmett at fair price. Boy's got a trust fund now that'll see him through college if he wants. But I reckon he won't go. Ranchers don't leave their land. And me? Well, I ain't a millionaire anymore. I'm something better. I'm a father. Every morning, Emmett and I break the ice together. He wears his grandfather's gloves, works the bar like he was born to it. And when the sun comes up over those mountains and lights the valley gold, I know what I always suspected but couldn't quite believe. Family ain't about blood. It's about choice. It's about who you'd walk through a blizzard for. And on a cold Montana morning, when the world's just waking up and the meadowlarks are starting to sing, that's enough. That's everything.